It's time to get outdoors and enjoy Arizona season. Camping, hiking, fishing, biking, whatever you might enjoy. And it's the perfect time of year to take your holiday visitors to see the magic of Arizona. Visit azstateparks.com/amazing and plan your next outdoor adventure. Arizona State Parks and Trails wants to remind you to respect the outdoors, keep your distance from wildlife, and pack up all trash that you pack in. Arizona State Parks and Trails.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Hey everybody, it's Jester here for a little bit of an update. The episode you are about to hear was recorded a few weeks ago before the current situation with the coronavirus and the tough decisions that all hikers are having to make right now, whether you are preparing for a through hike or a long section hike. My heart truly goes out to all the hikers, trail associations, hostels, shuttle drivers, local businesses, and quite frankly, all those involved in some way with the trail communities that are being affected. If there is one thing I know about the hiking community, we will unite together and get through this the best way we can and continue to put one foot in front of the other. Before we get to today's guest, I have a familiar voice joining us with a current update on how the coronavirus is impacting hikers and local businesses in the Duncannon, Pennsylvania area. Maria Wishart, aka Wheezy Pee, lives in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, which is a town that the Appalachian Trail goes directly through. Wheezy Pee, I never thought you would be back on the podcast this fast, but thank you for joining us and talking to us a little bit about what's going on with this coronavirus.
Absolutely. You're welcome anytime.
I really appreciate it. And just so people can kind of have a visual, Duncannon, Pennsylvania is roughly around the 1,100 mile marker and just north of the halfway point on the Appalachian Trail, just to kind of give people perspective. So Wheezy Pee, let's get right to us. What's the vibe of the town of Duncannon, Pennsylvania right now?
The town is a little bit quieter than normal. We have some businesses that are open, but kind of not open. So it's just a little bit quieter. People are still walking their dogs and getting out around town. A lot of people working from home. People are still getting out and hiking Hawk Rock. The parking lot's been packed every night. So the vibe is pretty decent. Everybody's kind of hanging in there, keeping their social distances, but still going out for ice cream.
Very good. Very good. And I just want everybody to know that we are actually recording this. It is Thursday night, probably close to 9 p.m. at this point, because Wheezy Pee and I were catching up before we started recording. And so we're trying to get this as current as possible. And I'm actually even afraid to look at my cell phone because there's probably more updates. But I wanted to kind of see what changes you're currently seeing in town, kind of like with closures, services, shuttle drivers. So what's going on like at the Doyle right now?
The Doyle is open for takeout only. As far as I know, they're not putting anyone up right now, but they do have takeout food available. The lights have been off the last 2 nights when I drove by there, but the last update from them is that they are open for takeout food.
And I guess I should have explained to everybody what the Doyle is. So do you want to explain that a little? It's kind of an iconic place in Duncannon.
It's the famous Doyle Hotel. They do have a hostel upstairs from the bar, and they serve food and drinks. It's a great place to get a burger and a cold beer when you're coming through Duncannon. It's a must stop for most AT hikers.
Perfect. And what about laundry services in town right now for hikers?
Right now, the laundromat is still open. And the last, I put feelers out there in town, and they said that the laundromat has vowed to stay open as long as they can.
That's really, really good information. And what about, and I know some hikers are concerned, through hikers, section hikers. What about resupply options? Are the local gas stations, the Dollar General, are those businesses still open right now?
Dollar General is open. There's a newer Dollar General that's right near Mott's Bogs that opened within the last year. That is open. As far as I know, the first hour of business is going to be for seniors only. I'm not sure if Mott's Bogs is doing the same thing, but a lot of the stores around here are doing that. The first hour is seniors only, as to not have too many people in the store with the seniors. So that's helpful. There's another store in town called Kind of Outdoorsy. They have some resupply and some things like fuel and stuff like that. They are staying open only for hikers. So they're not open to local traffic, only hikers.
And that's really good information. And I also know there's a local campground in town. Do you have any information on that particular campground right
I
now?
do not have any information, unfortunately, no. And gas stations, I should mention, the gas stations are open. When the governor gave his directive the other day, gas stations are considered one of the essential businesses. So we do have two very good gas stations, a little bit of a walk outside of town. If you're going northbound, you would come through Duncannon and take a left onto, I believe it's 22. And we have a Sheets and a Rudders, and they have a lot of stuff because a lot of truckers go there. We also have a Pilot. So there are places to get things. Toilet paper, though, will be an issue when you're coming through. Toilet paper and hand sanitizer is not in any store and hasn't been in any store for about a week now.
And that might be something, if they're coming through, that they want to ship themselves, maybe in
Yeah.
a box to the post office. And I'm going to assume that there's a local post office there in Duncannon where supplies can be shipped.
Yes, the post office is open regular hours. It's right on the main street in town on Market Street.
And I know that you frequent a church there in town because you talked about it on your episode. And they do have a particular hostel, but it's not open yet. So as of right now, are there still plans in the works that they're going to continue to open on their particular date? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So the hostel with the church, Duncannon Assembly of God, is not open for the season yet. So they usually open up, I believe it's the end of April, beginning of May. So as far as it stands right now, I think they're just kind of doing like a wait and see kind of thing. There's been no word as far as them not opening. So I think they're just going to wait and see how this plays out. And if you're coming through and you're looking for services from them, actually worship services, they are going to only be doing remote services for the next 2 weeks.
And you mentioned something that I actually want to, actually two things. First, you said that Duncannon is not that far from a major medical center. So I think another concern is hikers being able to get off the trail and, get to a medical facility, not just for the coronavirus, but, if they needed to see a medical doctor. So talk to us about the proximity of getting medical care.
So this area has a lot of urgent care facilities. So there are urgent care facilities in the area, not directly within Duncannon, but within a 20 to 30-minute drive of Duncannon. So there would be ways for them to get to those facilities. We also have Hershey Medical Center, which is one of the top hospitals in the country. That's within a 30-minute drive as well. Harrisburg Hospital is not that far from here. I think it's about 15 minutes. So there are plenty of medical facilities in the area. If they were to come in to town and be injured or on a regular basis, or they start feeling sick, there are medical facilities in the area that you're able to get to, maybe calling for a ride or a cab or Uber, or Lyft or something.
Oh, and that's good to know too. So Uber and Lyft are available in Duncannon as well.
I believe so, yes.
All right, perfect. And one last thing I want to talk about is your husband, and he is in a position right now with his job that has actually become very vital to not only our economy, but our country. He is actually a day truck driver. So talk to us a little bit about how, kind of not his position has changed, but what he's doing and what he's delivering has changed.
Well, he's been working very hard, as well as a lot of other people in the transportation industry, to get things moving. So his company does a lot of work with Dollar General and grocery stores, transporting medicine and transporting necessities like toilet paper and PetSmart for food for your pets and things. So they've been putting in a lot of hours, moving a lot of trailers, moving a lot of freight to get these goods out to the stores that need them to resupply. So they're all working really hard to get it done.
And tell him thank you very much for that. Not
Oh, I
only
will.
I know the hiker community thanks him very much, but your community at large does it well, because all of a sudden, people who are carrying freight become extremely important to, continue the pipeline, because even on social media
Absolutely.
today, people are in a panic, so to speak, of being able to get supplies. So I just wanted to put that out there, that as of right now, Thursday evening, March 20th, your husband is still employed. He's still running supplies and,
Still
and getting
running.
those things out there.
They're
Um,
running as much as they can,
as much, yeah,
as
and
much as they're
probably
allowed to. Yeah.
as much as they're allowed to. And I know there's restrictions on drivers as well, because they
Right.
don't want drivers out there with lack of sleep and things like that.
Right. They have a certain number of hours they can drive per day.
Well, Wheezy Pee, I really, really, and the listeners really appreciate you coming on the show. And I'm going to keep you in the pipeline, because, like we discussed, I mean, things are changing by the minute. We could probably go on social media right now, and another conservancy update could be out there from any one of the trails, cautioning
Yeah.
hikers, updating the numbers on coronavirus. And last but not least, I know you're still out there doing some hiking, and you mentioned that you've seen some hikers. So is your plan still to go out this weekend, practice social distancing, stuff like that?
Yeah, my plan is to still go out. I typically don't hike with many people, and I'm just going to practice social distancing and I still have some hand sanitizer, so I'll be carrying that. I just, I've been going out every night with him. There are people still out on the trails. I've noticed they are, for the most part, practicing the social distancing. So I'll still be out there hiking.
All right. Sounds good, Wheezy P. Stay safe out there. And once again, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it. And now we'll get on with our next guest. Welcome back to Jester Section Hiker, the premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where you will hear stories about everyday people who, in addition to their everyday lives, make the commitment to hike long distance trails where every section is a new beginning. On this episode of the podcast, we are going to have our first Colorado Trail section hiker. She originally reached out to me and stated she was glad it took me 12 years to section hike the Appalachian Trail, because she was likely on that same time frame or longer for the Colorado Trail. She and her husband spent a month hiking on the Te Araroa Trail in New Zealand back in 2009, when nobody hiked that trail. She has worked in Alaska with a daily view of Denali, spent time in Shenandoah National Park while living in Virginia, and now lives in Denver, Colorado. She loves spending time with her family, being trail angels, and she can be found on Facebook by her name, and loves being part of the Colorado Trail Section Hikers Facebook page. Please welcome with me to the podcast, Rachel Harmon.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be talking to you today.
Finally, we connect, Rachel. Very glad we're finally connecting, and you're going to be on the podcast. And we have a lot to talk about. But first, I want to make sure everybody knows that you and your husband, you guys actually moved to Colorado back in 2013. But before that, in 2009, you spent a month hiking a big section of the trail I cannot pronounce, but I'm going to try it again, the Te Araroa Trail in New Zealand. So you can correct me on that, Rachel. That's not a problem. So
You're close.
I'm close. I'm trying. It's my accent, so I can get away with it. So let's talk about that trail first. I mean, that's fascinating, because I hear a lot of people nowadays, hey, I'm going over to New Zealand. I'm going to hike this trail. So why back in 2009 did you guys decide to hike that particular trail?
Well, we already decided that we wanted to spend a year in New Zealand. And we had recently listened to an audiobook version of A Walk in the Woods on a long road trip. And so it was sort of on our mind that we'd love to do some hiking. New Zealand's a fantastic place for hiking, or tramping as they call it. So I was perusing a guidebook, I think it was called Tramping in New Zealand, and there was little blurb on one page that mentioned this trail. And at the time, it was still in development, so there were big chunks that weren't done yet. But it just seemed so exciting. So I went on the website and tried to figure out what portions we could do, and just what a great introduction to life in New Zealand to have started off our trip that way.
How awesome. And they call it, okay, it's not hiking, it's called tramping, like TRAMP.
That's right. Tramping is the official term.
Interesting, interesting. So how long is the I'm gonna call it the TA. So forgive me, listeners, because I can't keep saying that. So so how long is the actual TA?
Well, the Te Araroa is about 3,000 kilometers. So I think that's something like 1,800 miles. And it's spread over the two islands, the two main islands in New Zealand. So it goes from the tip of the North Island all the way down to the southern tip of the South Island. So it's a really, really interesting trail that I've never seen anything quite like before.
So when you guys were, going about your logistics for this, how did you decide, hey, let's go to this end and start, I'm going to call it tramping, or, let's start over here. How did you guys start figuring that out?
Well, we wanted to keep open the possibility that we might hike the entirety of it. It didn't remotely work out that way, but we thought that if we start out in the north, we had that more as a potential route. It's also much closer to Auckland, which is the main city that you're going to fly into if you're coming from overseas, than any other portion. So we were able to fly into Auckland, took a long bus ride up to the northern part. We actually joined a tour group to get all the way up to the far northern bit. It actually starts by this little lighthouse right where the Tasman Sea and the Pacific Ocean collide. And so we thought, let's start here and then see what happens as we hike south.
So nice. So did you guys, before you, left the United States, did you get all your maps together? Did you say, okay, this is what we're taking? Walk us through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so there was a spreadsheet, as is my way, but it was a little more difficult to piece together information since it was so early in the development stages. And that said, it was probably still 80% done or something like that. So it was mostly there, but we really had the impression that very few people were hiking long sections continuously. This was also back in 2009-ish. This was before I had a smartphone for sure. And so trying to figure out what we would do with maps was pretty tricky for us. We had a lot of just printed papers that we carried along with us that had these kind of very homemade directions. On this segment, you're going to be looking for the second farm gate, and then try not to,
Oh, wow.
Get too close to the cows, and then look for the gnarly trees. So it was a little homegrown for a while.
That is awesome, though. I mean, you guys just were like, yeah, we are doing this. So did you have to get like a travel visa, or since you were going to spend a year over there anyway, how did that work?
It worked out really well. Being Americans under 30 at the time, we were eligible for the work holiday visa. And so that allows someone the opportunity to stay in New Zealand for up to a year. And the bonus is that you can legally work while you do it. It's intended to fill temporary positions. So you can only work in one position for up to 6 months. But in theory, you could work somewhere 6 months, switch jobs, work the other half of the year. And it really worked well for what we were hoping to do there.
Nice. Now, I got to talk about, we have to talk about your gear. Now, did you guys get all prepared with everything and you've got your maps, and we know there weren't smartphones, heavily reliable back in 2009. So how did you guys decide what you were going to take and, how you were going to get everything there, and kind of walk us through your gear?
Yeah, that was the fun part for us. We spent a lot of date nights at REI, and there's a great shop in Minneapolis, Midwest Mountaineering. We spent a lot of time in both of those places. We were able to hit the trails in Minnesota where we were living at the time and do some of those shakedown hikes. So we were pretty happy with the gear that we had by the time that we went. We found that rain gear was pretty big. We were glad that we had that. Gaiters are very popular in New Zealand. So we felt like we were in a pretty good place, but a lot of it was still new to us when we first arrived. We're breaking it in for sure.
So yeah, for sure. So walk us through, a typical day out on the TA trail. What's the terrain like? Is it a lot of up and down? Is there a lot of elevation gain? What's your footing? Things like that.
Yeah, I love how diverse it is. That's one of the things that's most exciting about New Zealand. Depending on kind of where you drop down in the country, you could be in a subtropical area, you could be up on some fairly active volcanoes, you could be in a wide open glacial valley along a lake. So that's one of the things that's really fun. It all depends on where you're hiking. For us, it was starting up in the north was closest to that sort of subtropical area, but we started towards the end of winter. So there were certainly days that we woke up with a layer of frost on the tent and we were pulling out the hats and gloves in the morning. The trail was still pretty rough. A lot of it is described as a route, which the terminology there essentially means that it's very limited in its maintenance. It's not heavily trafficked. So we actually invented a term while we were hiking that the person in front was called the cobber, and that was because there were so many spider webs that you would, break into sometimes with your face. You'd be knocking them down. That was always fun. So whoever went in
I
front, we
love
called them the
that. I
cobber
love
because they
that.
did that work, right?
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's a
I'm
nice,
gonna
nice
steal
hiking
that from
term.
you. I love that.
You are welcome.
So how many miles well, let me ask you this question first before we get into that. When we were originally talking, you stated to me that that particular section hike on the TA trail, which, I'm not going to call it by its regular name because I can't say it. You said that that was a rude introduction to hiking. So explain to the listeners what you meant by that.
Well, you learn a lot in the beginning stages of a through hike or a section hike or even just a long backpacking trip, especially if you haven't done that a lot. And that was really our case. This trail starts along a beach. It's called 90 Mile Beach, but it's actually only 60 miles. I guess it's just to sound a little more impressive. And we learned that that actually is a pretty painful experience. You never really get to walk on a fully flat surface. You're always sort of looking for what's the most packed area that you can walk on. And for us, we just found that that was such a recipe for blisters.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I would pick some spot on the horizon and, it looked just the same as every other spot since it was just beach and dunes for miles and miles and miles. And I would say, if I can just get to that little bump, then we'll stop and have lunch and I'll take my shoes off and soak them in the water. But I think we lost a lot of weight in those first few weeks, sort of accidentally. It was fun, but rough.
It was fun but rough. So, did you see many people out when you guys were out for that time frame?
No, definitely not. Very few people hiking the trail. We didn't ever see a through hike or anyone doing any sort of long term hiking on the trail. We'd run into people in towns, and they were unfailingly lovely. We got offered so many rides into town. We had people, drive by and invite us to stay the night and take us out to see the sights in whatever town we were in and make us dinner. It was wonderful, but actually on the trail, very few people until we got much, much closer to Auckland when people were just out walking their dogs and out for a day by the sea.
So, how did you guys do your resupply when you were out there? Did you plan ahead? Hey, we're going to be walking through this little town kind of thing, or walk us through that?
We did. We had a bounce box that we sent ahead a couple of times. It got lost towards the end, so that made things a little bit more complicated. But we did know generally what towns we might be able to resupply in. It's harder, especially if you're not familiar with the area, to really gain a sense of how large the town would be. So we, looked at Google Maps and knew, hey, there's a grocery store here. And it turned out to be, essentially something like a 7-Eleven where you're trying to restock for a week and you're paying $12 for a sausage or something. So
Oh,
sometimes
wow.
it became a little tricky, but in general, we knew where we'd be and planned to be out for about 5 to 7 days before fully restocking.
Let's get down to the brass tacks here. How much time did you plan to spend out there, and how much time did you actually spend out there?
We left it open at the start so that it wouldn't be terribly disappointing if we didn't make the mileage that we had hoped. We spent 34 days. We hiked from the tip up there, Cape Ranga, back down to Auckland where we had started, and that seemed like a good place to reevaluate and decide what we wanted to do next. Something like 350, 360 miles, so it certainly was not setting any records for speed, but we had a great time, and boy, did we learn some good lessons along the way.
Well, that's the most important thing, is that you had a great time. So, do you and your husband have any plans in the future to kind of go back and tackle the rest of it?
Oh, I'd love to. I don't have anything on the calendar yet. My kids are little, and that seems like that might be logistically tricky, but my heart is in New Zealand, and I would love to return and finish that one.
What bit of advice would you give? That it seems to be there's a lot of people talking about the trail now over there in New Zealand. What piece of advice would you give to them before they head on that adventure?
I would encourage them to leave extra time. One of our biggest regrets was not being able to take people up on those generous offers that I had mentioned. A lot of times we felt like we were on a mission and, in our minds, we had to get to X trailhead that day. And I really wish that we had stopped and gotten to enjoy some of the towns along the way and taken advantage of that hospitality and even just sat on the beach for a little while and enjoyed a nice sunrise or a sunset. We didn't do enough of that.
Very good advice. And if I ever decide to go over there, believe me, I think I will leave some time on both ends. Now that I know the sand is going to tear up my feet.
Yeah, if you're not going to do the whole thing, I would say South Island is known for its spectacular beauty. It also has a hut system, so you can save on weight for your tent if you plan it right. But really, both islands, from our experience, were incredible.
Well, very good. And thank you for sharing that information with us. I know it's become an extremely popular trail. Just over the last couple of years, it seems to be getting more hype and recognition. But now I want to move on to you guys are in Colorado now, and you are tackling different sections of the Colorado Trail. But before we get into that, I actually want to talk about the Colorado Trail itself. So, where is the Colorado Trail in relationship to the state?
Well, it crosses the state. So it starts in Denver and then heads down to Durango. So it essentially goes from the northeastern corner to the southwestern corner. So for that reason, it's really a great introduction to Colorado, and it's fully contained within Colorado. So lots of local pride here.
And how many miles is the Colorado Trail?
Well, it's a little bit of a tricky question because there are some alternative routes. It's roughly 500 miles. If you take what I consider to be the standard route, it's 485, but there's also a little bit of a loop in the middle that gives you the option to add roughly another 80 if you were to do that full loop and create about a 565-ish mile trail.
Very nice. And I've always heard it's somewhere around 500, so that sounds perfect. So what are
Nice
some
ballpark.
popular so what are some popular towns in Colorado that the trail goes through?
I think the easiest ones to enjoy are Breckenridge and Frisco. The trail pops out right between the two. Each of them is only a mile or two down the road. I've been able to successfully Uber between there and the trailhead, which was really convenient. Those are great places to spend the night or spend a few nights, lots of places to eat. Leadville is another one that's fairly close by. You definitely need to either hitch or arrange track transport to get into that town, but it's a pretty high elevation mining town. So that one, again, enjoyable, not quite as big as Breckenridge and Frisco, but a nice one too. My favorite is Buena Vista, a little farther south, also not directly on the trail, but a really cool place to spend a night. There's a fudge shop in town that I'm a bit of a sucker for. And then towards
Okay,
the
you had
end,
me at fudge, so
Silverton.
I'm good with that. So yeah. I'm sorry, keep
It's
going.
pretty great. Then down towards the end, Silverton is a popular one as well. That one's a jumping off point for a lot of people who are doing section hikes because there's a train that runs between Silverton and Durango. And so you're able to take the train up and then hike the trail back down to the end. So that's a pretty appealing option. I think I'm saving that to be my last section of the trail so I can go out in style.
Oh, wow, and that sounds great, and I think there's a popular store in Leadville, the Melazama. I think I'm probably gonna say that wrong too. It's
Yes.
where they is that did I say that right?
To be honest, I can't remember. I've popped in and I've checked it out, but I cannot remember exactly how you pronounce it. So apologies,
I mean,
more
it's where
local
they're
people
making
than I.
these great shirts and, hooded fabric things that are supposed to be awesome and wonderfully wicking, and they don't sell online. You have to go to Leadville and buy your clothes there. That's another reason I gotta do the Colorado Trails because I wanna go to that shop. So, there
It
you
does seem
go.
like a rite of passage. So hopefully you can find what you're hoping for there.
So let's talk about the mapping system for the Colorado Trail. So how is the trail like mapped out?
It's separated into segments. So there's 28 total segments, each ranging, I think, 10 to 33 miles. It's about how long they all are. There's few great resources. I know there's gut hooks. I don't really use it because I'm more of a day hiker, and I've got my data book, which is a pretty cool, really small, portable introduction and summary of the trail. And of course, you've got a great full guidebook for someone who just wants to dive in and know all the details about every section they're going to hike.
Very nice. So are those segments, do they kind of go like road to road so you can kind of plan out your day hike or your section that you're going to be doing?
In general, there's also often trailheads throughout the segment as well. I completed one this summer that I'm pretty proud of because it took me like 5 or 6 years. Segment 6, it's the longest one, the one that's almost 33 miles. And I was able to find, I think, 3 or 4 spots, like 4 different spots in the middle of that segment, where I could be dropped off or somehow arrange transport. So it's not necessarily that you can only start out either end of that actual segment, but it tends to be the bigger places, the most likely that you find a hitch, especially if that's something that you're counting on.
Gotcha. And what would you say is the most traditional route of the trail? Most people are going, north to south, northeast is what's the popular route?
Denver to Durango is most definitely the most popular route. There's a few factors. I think one of the biggest ones is that you'd gain a lot of elevation if you go the other way in a pretty short distance. So if you're not used to the elevation and acclimatizing is big for you, I would say start in Denver for sure. There's a pretty steep climb right around the time where the Continental Divide Trail drops off and heads to the south, and it drops like 3,000 feet over a few miles. It's pretty rapid at that point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask too. Being here on the East Coast, I don't really think about acclimatizing to elevation at all. So when the trail starts, is it already over 6,000 feet and I know it goes over, several 14ers. Talk us through, somebody who just gets there. Hey, you don't maybe necessarily want to go out on the trail the next day. You may want to spend a day or two in town getting used to, being at that elevation.
Right. I know that's the plan for a lot of people, and it probably depends a lot on just what your body does. For me, I've never really had issues with elevation. I've been pretty lucky with that. So if I'm heading out for a weekend on the trail, and again, I live in Denver, so that's a little bit easier. But even if I'm heading up to, 10 or 11,000 feet from 5,000, it's not really something that I factor in. I know a lot of people really struggle just getting here at 5,000. And if that's the case, definitely work your way up pretty slowly. The Denver side does start really on the fringe of Denver itself. So probably about 5,500 feet is where you're starting. So thankfully, you're not hitting the trail right up in the middle of the mountains. You have the ability to gain that slowly if that's the route that you choose to take.
Very good. And how much of the trail, you mentioned it splits off from the Continental Divide Trail. So how much of the Colorado Trail is actually part of the CDT?
It's a pretty good chunk of it. It's about 300 of the 500 miles. So the fun
Oh,
part too
wow.
is that you can get to hang out with some folks hiking the CDT if you're there in the right season.
Nice. Very good. So now that we kind of got the nuts and bolts of the trail, let's get into, so why did Rachel start taking off and section hiking the Colorado Trail?
Well, it seemed like a great way to get to know the state that was so new to me. I discovered it within the first year of moving here from just perusing Google Maps. And it gave me just a great sense of focus to get out on the trail on a weekend or on my days off and explore some place that maybe I didn't know someone who could take me there, but I was able to check it out for myself and see what I thought.
So earlier you stated that the trail was broken down into 28 different segments. How many of those segments have you completed?
I've completed 6 of them, and then I have 3 that I've done most of. There's a few that I didn't think out very well before I went, and now I have something like a 2-mile section in the middle that's gonna be
Oh,
hard to
goodness.
keep up with. Uh, yeah, so there's a few I might need to reduce some miles in order to get them complete, but I've completed just over a third.
Yeah, so the trail is so beautiful. Not that I've been on it, but I've heard it's just absolutely gorgeous. So, talk to us about the segment you chose to do first and why.
I decided to start at Waterton Canyon, which is the traditional start of the trail. Just felt like there was something momentous about starting and then ending in the place where that is traditional. So it's actually a hike and bike trail for a pretty good portion of it. And Waterton Canyon is one where it's not terribly exciting yet. You're just walking up a gravel road, and there's actually cars and trucks that will drive by that are part of the, I think like the Denver Water Department. Not quite sure the right terminology. So I actually biked up that first section and then parked my bike and intended to keep hiking from there. So we'll see if I actually go back and do it on foot if I decide that I'm a purist in that way.
Well, of course you will if you decide. So, so is there any particular order to your segments that you're completing?
For me, it's really been based on convenience. So most of the segments that I've done so far are pretty close to Denver just because it's the way that I can get there within a day usually, or with a pretty quick overnighter. In general, I'd love to complete it as in order as possible. The one thing I feel really strongly about is that if I've decided to hike it from Denver to Durango, I'd like to hike each section northeast to southwest. And that historic way of doing that. A lot of times I'm doing out and back, so I get it both ways and it doesn't really matter kind of which way I start. But if I'm only hiking it one way, I want to hike the same way.
Right. And I understand that. And that is true. I mean, if you're doing out and backs and things like that. And I know you said at one point during our initial conversation that you like to do loops whenever possible as well. So talk to us about, doing some loops out there.
Oh, of course. I can't really fathom that people wouldn't want to do a loop if that's at all a possibility. It might be because I was raised by a dad who was adventurous and he would never go the same way twice. But I feel like if you're going to have to end up at the same spot, if you're able to see twice as much terrain, why wouldn't you do that? So it's tricky sometimes to figure that out. Sometimes that means I'm walking on a road for part of it, but it's also part of the adventure, figuring out how you can make it work and make it as adventurous as possible along the way.
Now, I know you said earlier you've got these spreadsheets. So when you're going, figuring out your loops and your out and backs, is everything going on that spreadsheet?
Well, there's a distinction that I make. So I'm counting all the mileage total just out of curiosity, but I'm really honing in on the Colorado Trail mileage. So when I'm calculating what percentage I've done, that's what I'm looking at. But man, I want the rest to be counted if my feet are going to be hitting the road for that portion of time.
And I completely understand that. So when you're out there, are you doing most of your section hiking solo or do you try to coordinate with friends?
I found that that's varied a lot over time. At the beginning, it was solo, part of it just being that we were new to the state and didn't have a lot of people to invite. And also, I was working a job where I had like Tuesday, Wednesdays off. So my husband had traditional weekends off, and most of my friends did too. And so if I was going to go hiking, I was going to go hiking solo. And there's some great advantages to that. And after that came a season where I hiked a lot with friends. And then now it's been a lot with my family and bringing our kids along for the ride as well. So it's changed over time for sure.
So when you're out on the trail, I always like to ask people this that are hiking various trails throughout the country. Would you say that you meet more section hikers, day hikers, through hikers? Who are you seeing out there besides yourself?
I see a lot of day hikers and a lot of mountain bikers too when I'm out. In the right season, I see the through hikers and the section hikers, but I also like to do a lot in the shoulder seasons. It's not really prime time for someone who's going to be seeing the whole thing through. So if I'm out there in the snow in February, it's mostly someone who lives nearby and they're bringing their dog out to get some exercise most of the time. And there's certainly plenty of days where I don't see another soul, and those are beautiful in their own way too.
So what is the season to hike the Colorado Trail? I know that, weather probably plays a huge factor. And right now it's middle of winter. So I don't know if people are skiing, snowshoeing, or even if anybody's out there. So talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, the high season is July and August. You really can't start too much earlier than that if you're going to be heading over that central portion on the higher passes, just because of the snowpack. So a lot of people might start earlier, skip that, head down to some lower parts and come back for it if they just really can't make the July-August timeframe work. But that's when I hear most people really getting in the meat of their through hike, if that's what they're doing, or doing a section hike, again, in those central kind of higher portions. Weather conditions are tricky too. You really get into that monsoon season with some thunderstorms. So there's a lot to plan around. But I found that if you're not committed to doing a certain portion of the trail at a certain elevation and you have some flexibility, that there are parts that you can hike year round. And I've really enjoyed being able to do that.
Very good. You also stated to me that you've kind of gone through some hard times and you've shed many tears on the trail and that the trail was healing for you. So, how has section hiking the Colorado Trail helped you with your healing through those hard times?
There's times that you just need a little solitude, right? For me, it was my husband and I went through a few miscarriages within a year, and I just needed space to deal with that. And so, heading out on the trail on one of the more lonely portions of the trail and kind of the off days, not in the peak season, um, there was lots of prayer and lots of tear shedding and probably talking out loud. And I might have looked a little bit crazy along the way, but it was just good, I think, to have that unlimited space where you don't have a lot around to distract yourself with. So you can sort of hone in on the things that are important or that you need to deal with. And there's really nothing like the trail, I think, to do that for you, at least for me.
I understand it. It's almost like the trail accepts everything. Do you find that, Rachel, that no matter what you need to get off your chest, or if you're talking to somebody, it just seems like the trail can take it. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And then you hike on and you can leave it behind you in some ways, which is great too.
That's a great way to put it. You can hike on and you can leave it behind in some ways. Is that one of the things in between your section hikes? Is that one of the things that you crave, is being able to get out on the trail and kind of cleanse, so to speak, and not only, get in a section, but also kind of cleanse your mind?
I do. It's just a wonderful way to have that space. Really, I think there's just nothing like the smell, especially I just love the smell of pine. So I get a lot of that in Colorado. There's smell, and I'm convinced that there's something about the smell of the sun hitting a pine tree, like a sunny day pine tree is somehow different than an overcast day. I never feel anything but grateful and wonderful and full of energy at the end of a day like that. They're a beautiful thing, and I think my soul needs that.
I mean, literally, I can smell a pine tree right now. Now, I mean, I'm visualizing the sun hitting the pine tree. It just it takes me, right there, that I crave that now. I want to have that feeling. So I totally understand. I was originally going to ask you about your worst day on trail, but based on some things we talked about in a previous conversation, I'm going to ask you about your scariest day on trail.
Well, I had alluded to those summer thunderstorms, and that really is a thing here in Colorado. The general wisdom is to be off of the mountain by 2 p.m. So if you're in an exposed spot, get up early, get out there, get it done, and then get back down after lunchtime. I'm not great about getting up very early in order to make that happen. I'm not the one who's up at 2 a.m. to be at the trailhead by 4 a.m. ever.
Ooh.
So I find myself in a few sticky situations. So we were out near Breckenridge with my family probably 2 summers ago, and we were getting a pretty ambitious chunk done. And I could see the weather rolling in, and we could start seeing the lightning off in the distance. But it was one of those spots where there weren't many options. So we were trying to get over this next hump so that we could start heading down and getting off the trail. And I'm just looking over at my husband carrying my son, and he's on his back, a foot or so up higher than my husband's head, thinking, my 2-year-old son is fully a lightning rod for us right now.
Oh,
So we just
no.
we just ran down that as soon as we got to a spot where we could. We just ran downhill. I felt so bad for putting him in that situation, and that made me think that I needed to be more careful, especially when it's not just me. It's the people that I love who are out there with me, and I need to be thoughtful about things that are unique to this trail. And one of them is lightning, and I've got to learn how to deal with that.
Now, did you guys make it down in time, down into some cover?
Yeah, we got wet for sure, but we didn't get any lightning that was, frighteningly close. Nobody's hair was standing up, which is a good sign. But
Thank goodness. All right, so let's go completely the opposite. So that was the scariest day on trail. So what has been your best day on trail so far?
I think my favorite one was my only day on the trail this summer. I had a baby in May, so my goals were not
Congratulations.
ambitious this year. Thank you. And it was completing that segment 6, that long one that I had started in 2015 with a good friend and done in these tiny little batches. And all I had was like 4.5 miles to crank out. But it was another one of those spots where it was pretty tricky to figure out the drop off and the pickup. So my husband and my kids dropped me off up on Georgia Pass, beautiful spot right where the Continental Divide Trail comes in. And then they drove about an hour and a half around the other way through Breckenridge to be able to pick me up on the other end. And we brought a
Wow.
cooler and pick up some snacks so we could do some trail angeling and just had a great time. Our 3-year-old loved being able to hand out the Gatorades or the candy bars or the fruit or whatever we had. And it was just a great time with our family in the mountains. And I loved every minute of it.
That's great. You got in your hike, although your husband had to drive an hour and a half around. You guys, what prompted you to do the trail magic?
Well, I've sometimes been the beneficiary of it, which is a lovely thing. You never know what kind of day you're showing up for someone, right? This might just be the thing that they needed so desperately. And I think we also just wanted to introduce our kids to the idea of that we could give something to other people, that we could share in a meaningful experience for them, that we could meet people that were interesting that we hadn't known before. So there's a little bit of both. There was something very much selfish in it for us and wanting to also, give that little bit of encouragement to someone who was on the trail themselves.
That is so cool. And how did your kids react? I mean, were they like all into it, or describe kind of, how they were handing stuff to hikers?
Oh, yeah. Well, Everett, our 3-year-old, would kind of get a handful of stuff and he would see them coming and he would run down the trail sort of to meet them. And it would break his heart if somebody would decline any of it.
Oh,
So
no.
he wanted them to take all the things every time. And they were unfailingly kind with him. So it was a lot of fun. The little one just slept the whole time. She was great.
So what's
She had
next
no idea what was
for
going on.
she she was just happy to be out there, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So what's next for Rachel on the Colorado Trail?
Well, I intend to keep piecing it together bit by bit. I'm really hoping that this year is a backpacking trip is in my future. I'm in grad school at the moment, so finding little chunks of time between, when the summer and the fall classes start up is going to be pretty important for me. But I would just love to get a couple of girls together and hit the trail for a few nights and maybe get one of those sections in that's a little bit more remote and harder for me to get to on the average weekend. And just see like down in the San Juans. It's just a beautiful, beautiful part of the state and part of the trail. And I'm eager to spend a lot more time there in particular.
Very nice. Well, Rachel, thank you very much for not only being the first section hiker doing the Colorado Trail, but I mean, basically giving us some information about it and some things to look out for, and the smell of those pines for sure. So I'll be
You're
smelling
welcome.
them the rest of the evening. I can tell you that. So I
It's a
want to get
lovely thing.
into a little segment I do called Questions Listeners Want to Know. And there's 3 questions. And question number 1 is, what would you say your one luxury item is that you take with you, whether you're day hiking, section hiking, overnighting, no matter what?
Sleepy socks, which are just
Oh,
the fuzziest, warmest socks that you can find. I think there is nothing like being able to finish the day, and whether you're getting in your car and heading home at the end of it, or you're going to be out for weeks and these are the only dry socks you'll have the whole time, sleepy, wonderful, fuzzy socks are the best.
okay. Now you've added that to the pines. Now I'm visualizing sleepy socks. I mean, Rachel,
Oh, they're great.
you are introducing me to all kinds of terms here. I'm going to have to
And
recap
I've
those
made them
terms,
all
by the
up.
way. And you've, which is awesome. So, what is something that you failed at and learned from while hiking?
Learning when to just call it a day has been big for me. There was a time when we were hiking the Te Araroa Trail and there wasn't really a great place to camp. And so full disclosure, we camped illegally in whatever forest or preserve or whatever this was because we just couldn't find another place to camp and we were sort of done. And the next morning we woke up and there was this section that the guidebook described as like well-established trail. And then there's a mile in between that's pretty rough, but there's a route you can follow. And then you hit well-established trail again. So we hit this mile in between, and we could not find this route anywhere. I mean, we circled it for, I think, an hour and a half, this area, and we could not figure out where that trail disappeared to. And it just broke my heart to turn around and head back down and do all those miles we'd already gotten in this morning just to end back up in the same spot. But ultimately, that's what we had to do, and decide we're gonna hitchhike down to the next section of this trail, because this bushwhacking is not going to be successful. It was pretty dense brush, and we didn't have great navigation tools to be able to help us out with that portion. So knowing when to give up sometimes.
Perfect. And then number 3, your favorite trail meal.
Well, I think this depends on whether we're talking about backpacking or car camping. When I'm backpacking, I feel like I can justify anything. So Nutella sandwiches and Cadbury chocolate, if you're in a place where you can get that, is the best.
Ooh,
And then I really enjoyed
Cadbury
car camping
chocolate
lately. Oh, it's so good. You got to get the real stuff in New Zealand and Australia, just not the American stuff. Just don't do it. It's bad. So, get it there.
Goodness. Okay, now the car camping meal.
Car camping, a year or so ago, I discovered chicken and veggie kebabs, and I am all about them. So this is my favorite thing while car camping, because I do not put a lot of effort in when I'm backpacking. It's, tuna pouches and dried sausage. So being able to have like fresh vegetables and chicken and cooking it over the fire is a pretty great indulgence of its own.
Very nice. Well, Rachel, again, thank you very much for giving us information on the TA Trail, the Colorado Trail, some insights on that. And now we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
I am going to read for you a section of my journal from the Te Araroa Trail. And this, to me, just encapsulates the joys and the frustrations of the trails that you experience over any given day. And it just reminds me of how much fun this is and how much I can't wait to be doing that again. The day got off to a promising start, the morning sun having dried out our rainfly for the first time in weeks, and the campground owner charging us less than half of the usual rate. We'd been concerned about our first tramp of the day, a low-tide only route along and then across an estuary. But fortunately, we happened to be setting out near low tide and didn't have to scramble to find an alternate route. The soft sand was pocked with small pools of water that hid little still life scenes of red, green, and purple shells and sea life, colors that I wouldn't normally put together, but that are stunning when they occur naturally. We waded through the river at its shallowest point, tiny crabs skittering underfoot, and reluctantly climbed over farm gates back to the road to tackle the relatively short Cowrie Mountain. Had the track's orange arrow been pointing in the logical direction at a critical turn, this would have been a quick route. Instead, we huffed up a substantial hill only to find ourselves a half mile off the trail. The day finished off with 4 miles of beach walking that reminded us of why we hate beach walking. Finally passing a small bay with nearly a dozen surfers in the water before climbing steeply to hit the ridgeline in the intersection with the Breamhead track. This early part of the track was a wide-open grassy stretch, offering us constant views over the ocean to make up for the burning in our calves. During this hour of constant steep ascent, we were pleased to string together 20 steps in a row before rewarding ourselves with a long breather. We set up camp at the first sight of the start of the forest, despite the lack of a flat surface, only to wake every hour of the night in a jumble at the foot of the tent, having slid downwards in our sleep despite our attempts to even out the grade with our packs and extra clothing. We hereby christen this site Slanty Camp.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I really, really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you. It has been such a pleasure.
Thanks, Rachel, for joining me on the podcast. It was great to hear about how you and your husband spent time out on the Te Araroa Trail in New Zealand, your continued pursuit of the Colorado Trail, and how you introduced your kids to the concept of trail magic. Thank you for introducing us to new terms such as tramping, cobber, and unfailingly lovely. But most of all, thank you for bringing us to the smell of the pines, the healing power of the trail, and sleepy socks. Next up, we have Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kameyer as we continue our talks about gear. Welcome back to Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kameyer. I hope all of you have enjoyed our last few episodes where we learned more from Steve about his section hiking and then our special guest, Greg Bell. On today's episode, we're going to go straight into Q&A and see how many gear questions we can get Steve to answer. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Always glad to be here and help out.
Appreciate you coming back. And one thing I realized before we go any further, and I don't know why, we have never talked about your trail name. Oh. So I figured now might be as good as time as any. What is your trail name and how did you get it?
My name is Kiki and everybody knows me as Kiki. And the funny story is, and she's sitting right here beside me, Kiki is actually my dog's name.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
That is so cool.
Kiki is my soon to be 11-year-old German Shepherd's dog's name. And the way that this happened, and those who know me now are actually going to find this a little bit funny. Years and years and years and years ago, I thought Facebook was the absolute devil. I never wanted to have anything to do with Facebook at all. Just nothing at all. Then I started playing this stupid game on my phone where I had to have Facebook friends send me items so I could finish the game. And this is weird. So I had.
Hey, listen, I expect nothing less. Okay.
So I actually asked my daughter to set up a Facebook account for me so I could friend a couple of people and have them send them items so I could finish this game on my phone. But of course, I didn't want to use my own name. So I had her set up a Facebook account for my dog, Kiki. And we put pictures of my dog on there. And she had tons of fun with it. She's, a teenage girl. She just absolutely loved it. So that kind of went on for a bit. And then I started fielding some questions, some different medical stuff, some different hiking stuff. I started using Facebook a little bit more. And then somewhere along the lines, a picture of me with my dog ended up getting posted. And so a few months later, after being known as Kiki Kammeyer, I'm hiking down a trail in Saginaw, Michigan. And I've got some guy about 100 yards behind me screaming, Kiki. And I'm like, what the heck? And I did not have my dog was not with me either. So, I mean, it's weird for me to be called my dog's name because for 10 years I've been calling my dog Kiki. And I stopped. I was kind of weirded out. I was a little bit creeped out. I let the guy catch up with me and he's like, you're Kiki from Facebook. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So it just kind of stuck. And then of course, now, if you know me, I basically live on Facebook. I run my business through Facebook. I have the backpacking gear flea market, the reviews and frequently asked questions page, the trips and trails page. Now I'm like Facebook Junior.
You're like all in. Yeah. I mean, I hope you have stock in Facebook.
You know what? I should. I need to call up Zuckerman. We need to have a little conversation about this.
Oh my goodness. Well, speaking of Facebook, so today's questions, I pulled directly from the Backpacking Gear Reviews and FAQs, one of Steve's page, the group page. So let's go ahead and see how many we can answer here, Steve. This one is water filters for backpacking. Is there one that is preferred over the other? Now, on this question, it was the Sawyer versus the Be Free versus one I had never heard of, the MSR Guardian. Advantages, disadvantages of one over the other. And this one had almost 100 comments. So I figured it was a good one to ask you.
Yeah. And just like just about any other piece of gear, it's going to be 100% hiker specific. And what are you actually using this item for? And how many people are you filtering water for? First of all, I'd kind of like to get the MSR Guardian out of the way for a couple different reasons. I mean, let's say if you're a scout master and you've got a group of 30 Boy Scouts out there with you, maybe the $350 pump style MSR Guardian filter might be the way to go. But most of us.
Oh, wait, is that how much it is?
It's $350. Yeah. Which is absolutely absurd. Now, the one good thing about a pump, there's only one good thing about a pump style filter really, is that you really don't have to have any more than just a little tiny trickle of water. And you set your little hose down in there and you actually suck the water up out of the creek, as opposed to some of these other filters. We need to fill up a bottle, attach the filter itself, and then squeeze the water back out. The one thing about the Guardian is that, yes, you can get filtered water from a very, very minimal source, but the thing is heavy. I mean, you can carry one MSR Guardian or about 12 Sawyers, and they weigh the same.
Wow.
So it's very heavy. It's very expensive. And yeah, like I said, unless you're taking care of the water situation for a group of 10, 15, 20 people, something like that is just not for hikers.
Not necessary. I think I sold that Catadine filter I had actually on the backpacking gear flea market.
Probably.
I was like, I got to get rid of this.
I do see those pop up every now and then. Yeah.
I know, it's kind of funny. I'm like, is somebody still buying that? So, okay. So the MSR Guardian, big groups, I don't know, traveling out of the country kind of thing. If you need to filter your water.
Yeah. So that pretty much leaves us with really what are the two most popular ones out there. And that would either be the regular Sawyer or the Sawyer Mini, which they're basically the same thing, just a little bit different, or the Be Free, which the Be Free is the new thing on the market. And I'm sad to say I was a little bit slow to jump on that wagon and really check it out. Cause of course it is my job to know all of this stuff right off the bat, but being such a longtime fan of the Sawyer products, if you love something, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's kind of been my feeling with it the whole time. The Sawyers are still number one. The Be Free is an excellent option though. And again, this is something new. It's only been out for a year or so. They're just now making all the different little doodads and attachments and gadgets and bags and stuff that you can go with it. But in essence, they are very, very similar filters. One thing though, I will say this, and this is not necessarily one against the other. You cannot let these things freeze at all. You run some serious danger if you let these things freeze. So whatever it takes, if you are going to be even close to freezing temperatures, you definitely want to take the extra precautions and get this thing wrapped up, get it some heat somehow, sleep with it. I've definitely done that numerous times. I will actually sleep with my water filter in my pocket or in my sock or whatever, anything that you can do to make sure that this does not freeze. And please, by all means, if you even think there might be a chance that yours might have frozen, pitch it, toss it away for, what, $20, $35, $20 for the Sawyer Mini, $35, $45 for the regular Sawyer. Just be safe and get yourself a new one, because nobody wants to get beaver fever or Girardi or whatever else you're going to call it.
No.
It just is not fun. And this is such an important, but yet a very inexpensive piece of, gear.
Yeah. And what is the difference? Now I've used the Sawyer Mini and the Be Free. So in your opinion, what is the difference between the Sawyer and the Sawyer Mini? If somebody's looking to buy one of these, like for the first time.
Sure. Absolutely. The Sawyer, and this is really simple, actually. If you got two or more people, go with the regular Sawyer. If it's just you, go with the Sawyer Mini. The difference is weight, price, and the rate of speed that you can actually filter water. Some of us don't have anything better to do out there. We can sit around and just filter water all day long. But if it's just you, or if it's just me, I have absolutely no problems using the Sawyer Mini. Actually, that's my favorite filter ever. And not only does it filter like 100,000 gallons, which I've never taken one that far, but it is actually pretty quick. It's not as slow as what you think, but it's definitely not as fast as what a regular Sawyer filter would be. And honestly, this is something that, and for those of you who backpack that are looking for weird Christmas gifts or birthday gifts for non-hikers, a water filter is always a good thing. God forbid we hit like doomsday or zombie apocalypse. I have always said that hikers will be the most prepared people, because we basically live in the woods anyways. And a good, reliable water filter is something that we should all have, whether you hike or not. We all should have one just in case.
That is true. Very good stocking stuffers, by the way, as well.
Absolutely.
So very true. All right. So here's another question for you, Steve. There seem to be a lot of various questions on actual smartwatches specifically for hiking. I know that Garmin makes a couple, the Phoenix and the Instinct, and then Suunto has a few, and now there's a new company out. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Coros. But the main question is there one that has basic functions that a hiker might be looking for, like an altimeter, weather, versus all the other things that seem to show up on these other watches?
That is an excellent question. And the answer is yes. This is such a broad question. And again, this is going to be 100% hiker specific. Some people are going to be fine with something as, I don't want to say simple because it is still a smartwatch, but like the Suunto Core, where it does have just your basics. Personally, I wear the Suunto Ambit 3 Peak, which is a little more advanced. It has some pretty awesome features, and it's definitely a little along my lines because it does have some pretty serious GPS tech in it. It's got some, it does have all of your basics, your barometer, altimeter. It tracks mileage. It just does a whole lot more. So again, and the one thing about this is not one of those things where weight becomes an issue. The weight of a watch is basically the weight of a watch. You're not going to have a lighter watch because it has lesser functions. The watch is still going to weigh the same no matter what. My thinking is you might as well go big, get everything that you will use, and then get a little bit more, because you never know. You might not think you're going to need this function now, but for an extra couple of bucks, you might be able to get a upgraded model that might have a little bit more than what you think you might need, but you might end up using it anyways. And some of these watches can get extremely expensive too. So that's another thing that I personally had a problem with when I did first start wearing watches. I'm buying this $350, $400 watch. And I kind of joke, I compare it to a cell phone. I mean, a lot of us are carrying $1,000 cell phones and only using like 2% of what it can actually do. You know, we text.
Very true. Very
and
true.
We talk and we use the web, and you know, that's it. There's so much more that our phones can do that we don't ever use. And that's my one personal thing about watches. Actually study it, learn it. Don't just put it on, look at time. These watches can do so much. So if you're going to take the time and spend the money to get one, learn about it, read about it. There's all kinds of YouTube videos on every single model, and there's hundreds and hundreds of different models out there. You just name 3 different brands. Each one of those brands probably has 50 models each. So do your homework, and there's all kinds of internet or information all over the internet about watches for sure.
And I do have a question about your particular watch that was the Ambit 3.
Yes, the Ambit 3 Peak edition.
So what is like the charging life on that? How much time do you get a full day out of that? Is someone going to have to charge that each night?
Well, and this is one of those deals where you learn about your watch and you learn how much it can actually do for you. If I'm not using the GPS aspect of that watch, that thing will stay charged for 2-3 months easily. Now, once you turn on the global positioning stuff, you have a bunch of different options. You can have the GPS satellite zoom down and ping you every 30 seconds or every 6 minutes or every 12 minutes. That part of it really just depends on how accurate you want to be in your actual positioning. So the more that you have it ping you, the lower battery life that you have. But regardless, even if you have this thing pinging you every 30 seconds, you're going to get a full day's worth of charge out of it. Normally, I don't need to have this thing pinging me every 30 seconds. I know a lot of trail runners will do that because these guys are very, very logistical about every single step that they take. They want to be completely on time. They want to have every single foot measured out when it's all said and done. So those are the guys that are going to go through a full battery in a day, 2 days. Even with my GPS cranked all the way up pretty good, I can still go a week, 10 days probably.
Very good. And thanks for giving us information on that. I know there's a lot out there, and it's kind of like, oh my God, we could spend like 2 hours talking about watches, but just a little bit of information is good.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those things. You either carry an Apple phone or you carry a Droid phone. I mean, you either like the Phoenix or you like the Suunto. I mean, that's really about it.
That's what it boils down to. Now, This next question, we'll see if we can get one more in here. This next question seems pretty simple, but people want to know more information. Hiking poles. We haven't talked about this before on the podcast, but it seems to be a pretty popular question. To have poles or not to have poles, 1 pole, 2 pole, brands, construction, collapsible, cork handles. This is another one. I mean, I know for me, I'm a 1 pole person. I like to have the cork handles because of the sweating. So talk to us about hiking poles, Steve.
Sure. And this is a really, really fun one for me. I've gotten into this argument with people more than once for sure. What I find, believe me, what I find more often than not is these macho people who, I can hike without poles. I don't need poles. Poles are for wimps, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's fine. If that's your idiotic mindset, go ahead. But the truth of the matter is poles are amazing. And once you use them and once you give them an honest effort, especially a lot of the hiking that I do uphill, downhill, it is amazing how much poles help you out. And it is also amazing how much further you can hike every day because you're allowing your arms and your upper body to take some of that strain that normally your feet and your legs and your knees go through, especially balance. A lot of us don't understand how much energy we expel trying to right ourselves if we happen to step on a rock a little bit weird and we kind of shift off to one side. It is exponentially better to have a trekking pole there that you can stab into the ground really, really fast and help maintain your balance as opposed to your legs doing all of that work, especially when you've got 20 or 30 pounds on your back too. Yes. Again, once you start using poles and give it the real honest effort, I don't see how anybody can hike without poles.
No. And I got to tell you, I think the poles have saved my knees. I mean, to be honest with you.
No doubt. No, mine
and
too.
Hips.
Yep.
Yeah.
Knees, hips, toes, feet, ankles, heels. I mean, the poles are incredible. I am a two-person pole myself. And like you, I definitely use the core candles for sure. During summertime. During wintertime, I really don't care what I'm using because chances are that they're going to get broken anyways. But
hey, listen, I went to the one pole when I got to the White Mountains of New Hampshire in Maine, because literally you're grabbing one hand with a tree and then stabbing the pole in the ground, and two poles almost seem to be a nuisance. But I think it also depends on what trail you're on as well. True.
And you mentioning that is one of the reasons why I prefer the Z style poles as opposed to the I guess they're called telescopic poles. I like mine to actually fold up into a 3-piece Z-like section, and this just makes stowing them so much easier. The more common trekking poles, the trekking poles that we all used for years and years and years before technology took over, they either extend really long or they get shorter. And normally shorter means like 24 inches, which is not really short in the grand scheme of things, because now once you get to one of those positions like that where you kind of need to put one pole away, use a hand for bracing yourself, for grabbing rocks, and then you're using your other pole for stability. Now you've got this 2-foot long stick that you need to find someplace to put. And if you have the actual Z-style poles, they fold up really fast, really, really easy, and you can tuck them just about anywhere. These things fold up to like 10 inches long as opposed to 24 inches long.
All right, Steve, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I have to stop talking to you because not only am I going to get a new quilt, now I'm going to get some of these Z-style poles.
Black Diamond, Alpine Carbon Z, best poles ever. I've been using them for years.
Okay,
and years
Black
and years.
Diamond, Alpine
Carbon Z, yes.
Perfect. All right, Steve, that's a great note to end on. We're all going out and buying the Z-style poles. Let me get that right. So again, thanks for chatting with us, Steve. And everybody, please go check out Steve's pages on Facebook that are listed in the show notes. We would love to have Steve answer some of your gear questions on the podcast. So if you have questions, please send them to me via email at jesternc2212@gmail.com. And as always, if Steve answers your question on the podcast, I will send you some of those awesome backpacking gear flea market stickers. Thanks everybody for listening, and happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way. If you ever get lost, or if the trail leads you astray, the music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.